Welcome back to Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life. We are here talking all things inner work, inner life, and the inner work that we call the beautiful work because it makes your life so beautiful. And right now, we're in a month of having some guests on the show to talk about some self discovery tools. And today we have a new guest on the show, which we're super excited to share with you. And I hope that you'll take off your, let's say, your, what do I want to call it? I want to call it your filter of, I don't know, like fear. I guess it's ultimately fear, your filter of fear of trying new things, hearing about new things, and going into the land of what Laurel and I sometimes refer to as woo woo, but we don't think it's woo woo at all, do we, Laurel?
We do not.
I
Woo
know. It's our
woo is
life.
not even part of our conversation
It
anymore.
isn't. It isn't.
Yeah.
But I think it's the general term, that people use out there that is the thing that I think ultimately is kind of scary for people because it's something that they don't really understand or know about necessarily. And so we're here to help educate people on that. And we have a great guest to help us do that, don't we, Laura? I'm going to let you introduce her and welcome her to our show.
Sure. So thank you for that. And our
Yeah.
guest today is Meena Ruchi, and she reads the Akashic Records, offers wonderful things, and we'll talk more about that later. But Meena and I met through an incredible program that I'm going to give a shout out to, Women in Community. Now, our paths would have never crossed if had it not been for that. And for those women that are in this program, we refer to each other as Wink Sisters. It's an incredible sisterhood that brings women in business together to learn how to bring a spiritualness into and trust into their business while they're building the strong business foundations. And so, Meena, I believe you're still in Texas. Is that true? And a good example of my being in New Hampshire, how the universe brings us people into our lives. We cross paths with people that we're supposed to. So I didn't know much about Akashic Records before I met Meena. And when we met, I was talking about burnout. And I think you were just starting your business at that time. It's been a couple of years. I've since had a reading with Meena, and Laurel, you have too.
I have.
So we are excited. And when you were talking about, when you were talking about, dropping the filter of fear, I'm going to say, hold it gently in one hand and hold in the other hand the filter of curiosity, because the Akashic Records, in my experience, I still know very little about them. I know when I had a reading, it felt absolutely amazing. Such insight and wisdom that came through. Thank you, Meena, for that. But it is another tool that we want to introduce as a tool for self-discovery. As we start to learn more and more about our true self, our inner self, and do that inner work, bring curiosity into what else might you have access to that you've not tried, right? What other wisdom and guidance can you find, can you bring to your soul? And the Akashic Records is one of those areas. So thank you, Meena, for being with us.
Welcome, Nina. We're
Thank
so
you.
glad you're here.
Yes, thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah. So, Meena, will you start with just letting our listeners know what are the Akashic Records? What are they?
Yeah, great question. So we're all on the same page. So the Akashic Records are sometimes described as the subtle energetic imprint of everything that's ever happened, everything that is currently happening, and everything that could possibly happen in the future. So it's this energetic compendium of infinity and eternity. And the first time I heard that went right over my head. It's like, I don't know what any of that means. And it sounded very vague and it was just hard to grasp, but beautiful and poetic for sure. So the way that I like to think about them and describe them now, that is hopefully a little bit easier to grasp, is if you could imagine an invisible library in space that has books on every subject you could imagine, including you or your own essence or soul. in an Akashic record reading, when I'm working with someone one-on-one, it's like we're checking out the book on you, and you have the opportunity to ask questions and receive insight from this zoomed out perspective. So some people lovingly call the Akashic Records spiritual Google, because in a reading, it's like you can bring all the questions that you wish you could Google about yourself or your soul. Like, why am I here? What is my purpose? What are my gifts? How am I meant to be of service? How can I improve my relationships? Why did I choose my family? And things like that. All those big, burning existential questions are things you can bring to a reading. And ultimately, I feel like what the Akashic Records do is they help us see things differently. They're beautiful at helping us shift our perspective on things that we might feel stuck around. And if I could capture the essence and the magic of the records in one sentence, it would be, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And I think that really is what the records are all about. They help us see things differently and engage with life in a different way when we feel stuck. And I think that leads very often to new experiences of life, which is what the whole point is to have a more beautiful experience in life.
So wonderful. Wow. So much there. Huh, Laurel?
Wow.
Wow. I know.
Yeah. When you were using the words that you described as vague, I felt them right in my heart space. I've got to say, it felt so comforting to the way that you've described it.
And I want to just, I know, and I want to share with our listeners that, I'm such a kinesthetic kind of person. I feel a lot. And when I'm working energetically or working with people, I tend to feel things in my body. And I love it when I'm with somebody who I know is energetically and spiritually powerful, because I start to get a really strong line of energy that runs right through the middle of my body. And when we were sitting with Meena right before we opened the show, it came, and I was like, oh, I love being with Meena because I love this feeling. It's so cool.
I'm flattered. Wow.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. Yeah. So Meena, what was your first experience of the Akashic Records? How did it come into your life and then spark you so that you realized, wow, this is for me? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was not trying to find the records specifically. They kind of found me, and I ended up like connecting and finding the records after a really long, tumultuous, intense time in my life. There was just a lot of stress and a lot of like health issues, mental health, physical health, spiritual health. Everything was kind of in a really low, kind of dark place when I found the records. And the way that I began working with the records, I signed up for a class. And when I heard that description of the records, I was like, I don't know what that means, but it sounds so cool. It's like, there's no way that that's real. And I know y'all spoke to the woo before we started chatting. And that I was like, that just does not sound real, but wouldn't that be amazing if it was? And so I was like, I have nothing else to do. I found the records right when the pandemic was starting. So I was like, I'm just sitting around with nothing to do anyway. So let's just give it a shot. Literally, like nothing worse could happen. Like we were already kind of in this chaotic time. So I thought I would give it a shot. And I was working with a teacher. I was in this class. And if I'm being honest, my first experience with the records was horribly disappointing because it didn't work. And I was like so upset about it. So the way it was like in like the first or second class of this course I was taking, the instructor, my like beloved teacher, she was guiding us into the records, and I was so ready. I was like, this is going to happen. I'm going to Hogwarts. This is my time to shine. Like, it's happening. And I was like, magic is real. I'm so excited. And she like guided this whole thing. And then like she brought us back. There were questions. It was like this whole big to do about like opening the records for the first time and like meeting the keepers of the records. Yeah. And we came back and I was a little bit shell shocked and confused. And it hadn't sunk in yet that it just did not work at all. I was like, wait, like we're done? I was like, okay. And then people started sharing about their experience. And I was so jealous, like ragefully jealous, because people had these like incredible magical experiences. They were seeing things. There was a whole library. People were coming to meet them. There were like one of the people, I think it was someone who is now my best friend, I was so jealous of her because her experience was so mystical and like she was seeing so much. And I was sitting there like, were we supposed to like eat something or smoke something or drink something before this? Did I miss like an email about something we were supposed to do before this? So I was like, this is crazy. And really like this whole like experience happened. And I was like, all that has happened is I have been sitting in a chair in my room for like 20 minutes.
Waiting.
And yeah, and I was like, okay. So I was really upset. And I was like, this doesn't work. Magic is not real. There is no such thing as Hogwarts. It all just crashed down in an instant. And it was very upsetting. And
yeah,
I think I needed that experience because it was a profound moment of growth for me. It had to. And I think that was a really powerful initiation for me because it brought up so much of my own expectation and what I felt entitled to and how much I was in my mind and how much my ego wanted it to work.
Yeah.
So, and like something that like my teacher says about the records is anyone can open the records, but there are some prerequisites. And one of them is you have to be able to enter a deep meditative state. And the other is you have to have a pure heart with pure intentions. And I feel like that really spoke to that second piece of, yeah, I wanted it for different reasons. And that like intention wasn't totally clean. It was very innocent, in wanting it to be something like beautiful and magical and cool. And yet the records are very discerning about what they offer you and who they kind of like work with. And again, I do think that they belong to anybody, but yeah, I think that the clarity of the experience, the power of the experience is deeply contingent on your own energy going into a reading. So for me, I was trying to read for myself, so it was dependent on my energy. And when I work with other people, it's contingent on my energy, but mostly on the person that I'm reading for. And that impacts the depth and the clarity that the reading will offer. So that was a whole side tangent. So later, when I continued to work with the records,
Meena, I want to just say thank you so much for sharing that story because I feel like I know in my personal, healing journey and having done a lot of energy work and different kinds of trainings and stuff, is that there is what you come with is where you begin, right? And so when you come with expectations or a lot of ego or fear or confusion, right? It's like there's work to do there to begin to move through that so that you can come with a clearer and purer space, right? And that's the work. But we want that. I mean, this is the thing. Like the people get afraid of that, or it intimidates them. I say, "Oh, it's not going to work for me," or whatever. It's like it will work for you. But are you willing to do the work to get to the space where you can be open and have the experience maybe that you're hoping or seeking, Yeah.
I agree. The way that you described it was just so incredible. And I love the language that, you've brought into this space of expectations, of ego, of being in your head, right? Of wanting it to happen so very badly, right?
Yeah.
That your disappointment was so great. And now I've never mentioned this word on this podcast ever, but I'm going to say, as you were describing it, I was thinking, isn't this exactly what happens when we expect so much and when we are in our head? And the analogy that was so strong for me was sex.
Interesting. Yeah.
When we're in our head and we want so very badly for it to go a certain way, you cannot make it happen that way. It is not magical. When you can be ready and open to an experience and let the wonder and curiosity take you wherever it's going to take you, it's a whole different ballgame.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't mean to say that the Akashic Records are like sex. That's not what I'm saying.
No, but it's that whole idea too of like allowing yourself to be open to a greater experience than what the ego is may be ready for, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other example that came up for me was money. When we find ourselves with some unexpected money, whether it's a gift or income or however, when I find $5 on the sidewalk, right? It's magical if I let it happen rather than thinking, oh, I want it to happen. I want to find $5 on the sidewalk today. That's never going to happen, right? So I love the thought of just being open and allowing without expectation for what's going to come through with the records to come through.
Yeah. It's I loved that. Thank you. Yeah. I think it was such a potent example of like the records will meet you where you're at. And that was really something that drew me to the records initially. That's something that's one of the reasons I came to it. Was I loved this idea of the records being this protected system. So if you think of it as a library, there are librarians, there's keepers of the records. And so it's not something I was so afraid, and I still really don't like getting psychic readings because I don't know what they're going to say. And I don't want to hear something I don't want to hear. But with the records, it was beautiful because it was a question and response kind of dynamic. So it's like they won't say anything until you ask, which I thought was profound. And it felt so steeped in consent that it felt safe to me. Like they're not going to tell me something scary. I'm not going to like look into the eye of the void and not be able to come back. And yeah, I didn't know what was going to happen because infinity and eternity, it's overwhelming to say the least. It's unfathomable. And yeah, I just didn't know what was going to come out of it. But the fact that you can ask a question and then only if the keepers of the records feel that the response to that question is relevant, uplifting, and empowering, then they'll share with you. Otherwise, it will be silent, which I love because it's like, I don't know what I should know. I have questions, certainly, but I loved that there was some loving discernment happening, on my behalf from the records. And it was present in that first attempt where it was like this, like, no, like, try again. Look at what's happening here and then try again. Witness all that is present here and then try again. And it was nice. And I was upset, and I had to sit with that anger and all of that expectation and feel like that deep failure. It felt like an immediate and really intense failure. And to sit with that, those were some of my biggest fears showing up in a single experience where I didn't even open the records.
Yeah. I love relevant, uplifting, and empowering. I love all of those words so much because it doesn't mean that you're going to get a reading that's pretty Or, like only the good golden things will come through, right? It's the things that you need to hear that are relevant to your life right now, that can be uplifting to you and can be empowering, right? And so it might be that there's some work there to do, but the goal is to get to the place where you do the work so you're uplifted and you're empowered.
Yeah. And it might not be that it's super uplifting in the moment, but it's like to help you sink into a deeper experience of feeling uplifted and empowered. So sometimes there are things that come through the records that are a little bit, difficult to hear, difficult to process. And all of those are delivered, very gently and with consent, like not dumping anything on anybody. And at the same time, I love this piece of relevant too, because if you're asking questions that are more for entertainment purposes, they'll gently redirect you to questions that might have more value to you at this time, where it's like, that's not really relevant. Stay on track, which I think is nice. It's a nice way to respect and honor the modality and the records itself.
So Meena, how many, how did you find your way into, like, was it just, okay, I have another experience of it, and then eventually it kind of opened for you and you found your way into it? Can you just speak to that a little bit so listeners can understand that? Yeah.
Definitely. I know I went on a long tangent.
No, it was great.
I love that tangent.
There's so much there for people, I think as an example too. Like we love to use personal examples of like, this is how the work actually happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was a beautiful example of that. Yeah. Thank you.
So from that first encounter, first attempt, I practiced. There was a lot of humble pie being had in that time. And, and it just took attempts, but really it kind of brought my expectations down to reality of like, I'm not entitled to this. And this may or may not happen. It may not look like how I want it to look. Am I okay with that? And so kind of moving into that kind of like broader acceptance of like, I'm not controlling this. I don't actually control infinity and eternity, which was a newsflash to me at that time. And so I practiced, and it took some time to cultivate that connection where I was able to like hear, I'm going to put that in quotes very loosely, where I was able to hear the records. And eventually with practice, and I shared those 2 prerequisites that my teacher offered, and I offer a third one, where to work with the records, it's right, this deep meditative state, and it's a pure heart with pure intentions, and it's patience and practice. It's not an instant thing, at least in my experience. And over time, I was able to start, hearing the records, connecting with them. And it was soft and it was gentle, and it was not nearly as big and magical as I thought it would be initially. And as soon as I could hear even just like a trickle, I was asking questions, and I was like, I want to know about my purpose. I want to know about all these things. And the way that I ended up phrasing these questions and asking questions to the records was almost as though it was a job search engine. I was like trying to find a job at the time. And so I was like looking at job listings and then asking the records about specific job listings, which you're both cracking up, which I think is the correct response to that, because it was so goofy, like looking back on it. And it's so, again, like innocent. It's like, of course, those are the questions that feel most relevant. Like, what else would I be asking about? So, I was asking all these questions, and I was like, all of these answers suck. Like, these are terrible like responses I'm getting to these job like listings. I was like, wow, none of these like have any potential. That's so weird. And I just was not putting it together. And I was asking about the same type of job, the same title at different companies. So it wasn't even different types of jobs. That's how limited and narrow my gaze was.
And Meena, was it the same job that you had left before? Was it a job you had done before?
Yeah.
No surprise there.
Well, I had that job in like in a kind of minor league way, but I had just graduated from school when I found the record. So, and I graduated in the pandemic. So I hadn't really started working full time yet. But yeah, I was looking for jobs at the thing I just graduated with, at the job that I had so far. And I was looking for like a real, adult version of that job. And it was called technical artist. And that's what the title was. And so I was asking about all these things. And then one day in the records, I was like, none of these technical artist jobs at any of these companies are getting a good response from the records. And I was like, what if I zoom out a little bit? I had a moment of creative inspiration. I was like, what if I ask about this career as a whole and see what's around that? And so I asked the records, what's the potential of my artistic career? But instead of artistic, I accidentally said Akashic. So the question I ended up asking was, what is the potential of my Akashic career? And I had the most incredible, cheesy experience you could possibly imagine. So this is what occurred. So I asked that question, total accident, again in quotes, and what I experienced through the records in response to that was it was just wide, empty space in the records, like infinite space. There were clouds above me, and through the clouds above me, there was this parting, and it was this, just like in a movie,
Wow.
this radiant, brilliant white light shining down, filling up this whole space with this light. And I could feel it inside me and outside me. And there was no separation between the two. It was like I was that light, and it went on infinitely. And I could feel it in my physical body as like vibrating with potential. It was pure potential. And it was truly like the magical moment I had been wishing for, the moment of clarity I had been yearning for, the magic I had been hoping existed for over 10 years at that point. I had been wondering what my purpose was and seeking, and I couldn't land on it until this moment in the records. And it was so visceral and somatic that it was undeniable for me, because up until that point, just my baby connection with the records, I was like, I don't know if this is real. I don't know if this is my mind. It was hard to discern, but that felt undeniable. It was not coming from me. I wasn't making it up here and telling myself what I wanted to hear. It was something I could feel. And so that was a life-changing moment for me, because it hadn't even occurred to me that this could be a job. And it felt so sweet, because as that experience was happening, I heard the record say, we've been waiting for you to ask. Mm-hmm. And it just felt it was so soothing to know that life had potential for me in a way that truly I could not fathom outside of one job title. And it was so liberating. It was so expansive. And really, I think like what the records are brilliant at are helping us connect to infinite potential, infinite possibilities, helping us see things that we couldn't see for ourselves. And that was like a very almost like literal example of that, where just from that experience of witnessing pure potential, so many of my limiting beliefs naturally dissolved in that moment. And it was very powerful. So
wow.
Wow.
So cool. I know. And I feel like, that's a great segue, if you're okay, Meena, to take our, what we have requested of Meena is if she would open the records on our podcast, and we could ask a couple questions so that people, our listeners and our friends that are here, can actually have an experience of what it's like in a tiny little tidbit. It won't be a whole session with Meena. So get a grip out there. We're not going into a whole hour of, Akashic record reading. We're asking her to open the records, and then we'll each, maybe Laurel, ask her a question and see what comes forth. And then we'll close out the show. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll let you know when the records are
Okay.
open.
Thank you.
And as I'm connecting to the records, y'all can take this time to just sit comfortably and relax.
Mm.
If it feels good, you can lean back in your seat a little bit.
Mm.
I invite you to breathe at your own pace. There's nothing that you need to do. And I know this is a little mini reading, but if you have an intention for this experience with the records and together, you can just gently bring that into your mind. I'll be silent for a few minutes and I'll let you know when the records are open. The Akashic Records are now open. Is there, before I ask you for your question, I'm just feeling into the space of the records of your podcast. And there's a kind of playful image, and it feels like the energy of the podcast is almost serpentine. And the image is almost like a microphone where the cord is like the body of a snake and like the head is the microphone's head, which is amazing and playful. And it's like, it's cute, it's not scary, but it's got this like kind of rich, powerful, but soft energy to it.
Wow. I love that.
Is there anything that you'd like to ask?
Laurel?
I was going to let you go first, Laurel.
Is there any message or service for our listeners that the podcast is wanting to bring forth that we aren't yet connected with? So kind of speaking into that possibility, idea of possibility. Is there a direction we should be turning and looking that we're not?
Okay. Yeah, let me sit with that. So are many of the episodes just you two speaking to each other? It feels like there's potential to dive even deeper into that. There's this almost like a invitation, like a richness in the podcast where it's like it wants you to like express more of your individual like expression and power through the podcast. It feels like you could go even deeper, and I'm sure you have like rich and potent conversations when it's just you two. But it seems like there's more there, a richness, and almost like it's this energy of like opening further, blooming further, where it seems like, and this is something that kind of like goes in tandem with the life of the podcast. It's like, as long as you keep doing it, it will continue. You will continue to like open wider, and the podcast will continue to bloom bigger. And it seems like it's almost inviting you to drop into a deeper level of like safety that will allow you to express more sincerely and powerfully. It's almost like taking away a little bit of the veil that's between you and what comes through on the podcast. If there's any element, if there's any element of like, I don't know if I'm going to say this, I don't know if this is for the podcast, like kind of softening and opening a little bit. And I don't know if that answers your question, if there's more around that, but how does that feel to you?
Feels spot on.
How did you know?
I know. It's almost like you were in the conversation that we had before we recorded today, before you were here, Meena.
Wow.
Like, really? I'm not kidding. That's very cool. That's really incredible.
Really
We were
cool.
having a conversation about vulnerability because it had been coming up for me a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, as we were talking about vulnerability, it was also the belonging of, you know, belonging and vulnerability and our roles and responsibilities in that space. So those records, just so much guidance and love there.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love that it felt relevant and to what you were already feeling. It seems like you were already picking up on what the podcast kind of has in store for you. And it seems like it almost feels like a yearning on behalf of the podcast. Like the if the podcast was personified, it would be like, please share even more, like feel safe enough. And that's where it's coming from. It's like an invitation to feel safe in this space, in your own space that you're creating, but to relate to this as like, and not just like, oh, the podcast is a safe space, but do you feel safe when you speak? And it's like, that's kind of the connection. It's this like rootedness when you're using your voice. Can you access like a sense of physical, somatic safety, mental safety when you're talking? Or is it like activating your system?
Wow,
So
that's
practicing
beautiful.
dropping into that. Yeah.
Oh, that's huge. That's really rich for me. That's very, very powerful. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. And I want to, just for our regular listeners that are getting to know Laurel and I, more through the podcast, they know, that a lot of my journey has been, a process of getting comfortable using my voice and sharing my voice more and more in the world. And so to have that identification, that specific identification about the somatic feeling of safety in my body while I'm speaking is a beautiful marker to use to help me grow. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you.
And there is an acknowledgement too from the keepers of the records that that's not easy. That's not easy to do, and it's something that will take practice. And perhaps a nice starting point is exactly what you said, like notice when you do feel safe when you speak. Who are the people that you feel safe speaking to? What are the contexts? And it might be when you're by yourself speaking out loud or in your own mind, but almost like, and like doing it in both ways. When you feel a sense of physical or somatic safety, what does it feel like to speak in that moment, or even to sing in that moment, to use like to vibrate your vocal cords in that moment when you feel safe? And like practicing bridging the experience of using your voice and feeling safe, whether the safety is there first and then it's like, oh, I'm safe, I'm going to use my voice, or if it's like, I'm using my voice, can I drop into safety? Can I remind myself I'm safe? And that could be like placing a hand on your body and like breathing a few times. It's like, okay, calming the system down and then using the voice.
That's so beautiful. I feel like that's such a beautiful message to all our listeners too, in terms of, this experience of growing in the comfort of speaking your truth and how we grow into it. Those are great markers and actual direction about how to ease into it and grow your comfort and grow your strength, right? Your confidence in that. Yeah. That's really beautiful.
And I mean, many of our listeners know this as well, but when the universe brought Laurel and I together, I was really wrestling with visibility and using my voice. And so, here we are now in our season 3 of podcasting. But I still have experiences where I know my voice is out there, but when I'm faced with the acknowledgement of it, that often I'm not feeling safe. And it just came up yesterday with a listener who I saw in person and told me that she was listening and loving our guided meditations, and she said she could listen to my voice all day long. And I really was really what came through was the embarrassment of being seen fully. And it's really interesting because, so, when I think about the podcast and what it's bringing to our listeners, and what it's, Laurel and I are both deepening our own work through this podcast. It is a practice, and it's a learning, and it's the safety that you bring up and that the records remind us of is so critical in our growth, right? And is it the chicken or egg, right?
Mm-hmm.
Am I using my voice to learn to feel safe, or do I need to feel safe in order to use my voice? So I love that the records brought that forward. It's incredible.
Oh, so
Yeah.
good.
Thank
So
you.
do we have time for another question, Laurel?
Yeah, if we all have time, we have time. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my question to the records about or for the podcast would be, as we continue to bring this inner work and guide our listeners through inner work, is there more for the podcast? The growth and opportunities to bring to our listeners. One of the things that Laurel and I have been talking about is coming into a retreat space and opening up a physical space to be with others who are doing the work. And I would love kind of the guidance and insight of the records if that area is open for our growth.
As you began the question, the word retreat was present, and then you said retreat. So it seems like, yeah. And if there was if you watch the video of that, you'll see my face of like surprise and delight when you said that. I was like, oh my goodness. Yeah. Ooh, let's feel into that. Let's see what's there around that. It feels like retreats do feel like they're kind of coming forward. It feels like the retreat vibe. It feels so present. It almost feels, I won't say inevitable, but it feels like if you want it, it's inevitable. And if you don't want it, that's your choice. And of course, that's totally okay too. But it feels like the retreats are right there, and they're like ripe. And it seems like it's been cooking for a while, and now it's like ready to kind of come through, and you can take a taste of it. And it feels like the vibe of the retreat is more like a family reunion, not like a retreat, which is so cute and so funny. But it's like this thing of like, oh yeah, my family's coming from all over the country. We're like, or the world maybe too, but it feels like, yeah, it's coming from all over. We're going to gather in one space. It's going to be all kinds of like joyful noise, joyful chaos in like the best way. And it feels like it's oriented around like fun as much as it is around like depth and personal growth. But it feels almost like the medicine in the retreat is just the pleasure of being together in the same space and like getting to give a hug and play a game and yeah, spend joyful time together. It feels almost like the real work, the medicine happens through the like medium of the podcast where you're speaking and it's landing in the beloved like listeners' ears at the time that they feel it's ready and resonant and relevant to them, because you have no idea when it's hitting them. You have no idea when the episode is making its way to their being and to their consciousness. And it seems like that is where the real kind of like, catalyzing of work is happening. And of course, it's like, it depends on how they use it and where they go from there. And it feels like the retreat is, there is some of that, but it's more about the delight. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
How does that feel to you? Oh, you're welcome.
Joyful.
I was going to say delightful, right? When is the last time that we gathered as a group and just for the purpose of delight and joy and play and right? And it feels almost like celebratory. Like
that's the word that kept coming up for me too, Laurel.
It's so funny. That we do this work, our listeners do this work, and And often, I will speak in my own experience, I am so focused on what next in my work, not my job, but in my inner work. What is next for me? What's my next growth opportunity? That I don't take time to celebrate and joyfully delight in all I am because of the inner work that I have done.
Yeah.
So I love that thought of it being, a celebration of the work.
And just like reveling in the soul connection of like, I have so much in common with these people who have gathered here, in this like, right, kind of like virtual etheric space of sound in the podcast. And if you all come together in a retreat space in person, it's like, I have so much in common with these people. And we all do this work, and that's a deep thread of commonality. And what would it be like to have that be like this basis of connection, but to not like force that to be the only thing that we talk about ever? So it's like, we know we have that in common. We've been talking about that together for years. And now in this space where we're in person, it's the time to talk about other things and to do other things. And yeah, to engage in that celebration and play together. And to almost like recognize we have more in common than just the inner work we do. And it's like this kind of rounded out view of like, oh, these are full people with full lives. And I have a sister that's the same age as your sister. And like, I have, I do that kind of job too, or I used to live there, and like all these other points of connection, instead of just like, who were you in a past life? And did we know each other? And all of this stuff that's so fun and engaging, but it's like connecting more at a human level and in a joyful way than just this kind of deep, heavy stuff that can weigh us down in a way as much as it can lift us up too. But it's kind of exhausting. So it's almost like a retreat from that like heaviness of doing that like excavating underworld work, and just like delighting and like, these people get it, and we're gonna go for a swim.
So Meena, you may not realize this, but you just described in that little bit your words about the delight in the commonality. And Laurel and I, we have delight in commonality. We are both one of 5 children. We are both second-borns. We are both moms of adult children from a prior marriage. We are both remarried happily into a second relationship. We are both life coaches. We are both named Laurel.
Yeah. I know, but so it was like you were describing little bits and pieces of it all. It was like it was all coming through. Like,
and
so
last
great.
winter we started talking about where we were connected in past lives. And so you just brought fully this whole our relationship in a nutshell, and the delight that we have found in each other and discovering each other in this relationship. And it's been just a little over 2 years.
Right. That's it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Really?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
We met in May of 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
Through Instagram.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Wow. Well, Meena, I want to honor the Akashic Records and allow us to also, close both the podcast and the records appropriately. So
please take us there.
Yeah, we want to thank you first and thank the record keepers and all the helpers that came forth to help us and support us today.
I'm going to go ahead and close the records. And yeah, I think with the records open before we close, would y'all like to speak to your individual experiences you had with your readings? I would love to hear about that. And I wonder if the listeners might like to hear about your personal experiences having your records read in a full reading.
Laurel, I'll let you go first.
Sure.
Yeah.
I I think I came into it with expectation, right? And wonder, expectation and wonder. And my recollection of all the wisdom and insight that I received coming out of it was more than I ever imagined. I did not see colors or hear angels, and the sky didn't open up.
Mm-hmm.
But what I was left with was the confirmation, or even wisdom, insight into where my gifts fit in the world and why they are mine, which was such a beautiful experience. And I often, when I feel wobbly in my purpose, or what I'm doing in my business, or my coaching, or using my voice, I remember the records reminding me my value is just in holding space and being with others. And that was so freeing for me. Because after a lifetime of trying to strive to, push and persevere, and that the records gave me permission just to be. And when I find myself reverting to those behaviors of pushing and persevering and making things happen, and I think some of the words that you used early, were, realizing that you're not in control of everything, right? When I find myself in that pattern, I can hear the records, and through your voice and our reading together, in that I don't have to do that. That is not my soul's path.
Mm-hmm.
So that it was lovely. And I can't wait to have my records read again. Laurel, what about you?
Yeah. So when I worked with Meena, I was in a place where I didn't have a lot of questions about my life. I was not a sense of I'm coming in with a lot of inquiry. Because as everybody knows on the podcast who's been here for a while with us, is I've been doing personal inner development work for 36 years. That's a long time of release and inquiry and confirmation and wondering, and my life is in a really beautiful place. I mean, I live a beautiful life because I feel that I did the beautiful work. And so in my reading, what I did inquire about was being a steward of the podcast, of books, bringing books forth in the world, and what maybe I could do with those, or what I was meant to do with those, or what the records suggested might be a good way to work with those things. And got great, indication of what would be helpful for me and supportive in those ways. And so I think that, for everybody, when they come into a reading, right, it's so individual. It's so individual. And where you are is just where you are. And for me, probably the hardest part is to hear, I've done a good job. I mean, I could cry thinking about it, Yeah. And so, for me, I almost felt like the Akashic record keepers were a maternal voice, giving me a hug for doing, being here and doing my work. It was really beautiful. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Oh, and I remember that reading was so special. It was so sweet. And it was beautiful to witness that, this work has results.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And it can go on forever, and you can arrive at a place of deep contentment, deep satisfaction, and a beautiful generosity of service. And I just remember it was this outpouring of generosity that just emanates from you, because it's just such a natural, like, resonance that you hold. It's a reflection, a resonance, a radiation of your own contentment and joy and like connectedness. Yeah. Oh, so sweet. Thank you both for sharing.
Thank you for sharing with the listeners. Yeah. You know, all of our experience today. So yeah, I know we're going to close the records. I want to do that appropriately and well. Yeah.
Thank you to our beloved keepers of the Akashic Records for this transmission. Thank you for helping us to see things differently, for offering us the perspective and guidance. May all that was explored here be integrated with ease and grace to serve the life of the podcast and all those connected to it across time. And so it is. The Akashic Records are now closed. Amen. The Akashic Records are now closed. Amen. The Akashic Records are now closed. Amen.
I don't want to leave that. That all of it, the feeling, the vibration in my body, the calmness, the safety, the love, all just amazing.
Yeah.
And we have to switch gears into closing out the podcast. But before we do, tell our listeners how they can find you, how they can work with you, how they can explore the records as part of their self-discovery and inner work.
It does feel weird switching gears after that.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We just
Well, it'll all be in the show notes too, as well.
Yes.
So whatever comes up, Meena, that just feels right to say right now is good. Yeah.
Yeah. The best way to connect with me is through my website, which is meenaruchi.com. And there I have lots of Akashic goodies waiting. There's a free guided visualization channeled from the Akashic Records. I have over 100 videos where I'm channeling from the records. And my favorite place to connect and chat is through my newsletter, which is just once a week. And I share from the records and keep you posted on the goings on in my world. And yeah, I offer one-on-one readings, and those are offered in two different ways. I have like full-priced readings, and I also offer donation-based readings. So if finances would be a barrier to entry, there's options. And I also teach meditation classes. I do somatic meditation one-on-one with people. And I do Akashic Records workshops, which are a blend of somatics, meditation, and Akashic Records. And those are beautiful because it gives you a taste of what it feels like for you to personally connect with the records and have your own direct experience. So there's lots waiting for you there if you're curious.
And your once a month meditation on Thursday evenings, right?
Yeah, there's a free meditation class too. So yeah, there's lots of ways to dip your toes in or do a deep dive.
Or dip every toe in, right?
Go in head first too. It's always good.
Oh man.
A swan dive never hurt anybody if you know what you're doing. Oh, that's great. Meena, thank you. Thank you. We're so honored to have you today, and your willingness to share directly, the experience of having a reading with our listeners, with us. And I hope that it served everybody well today. I know it served us, and we appreciate you so much.
Thank you so, so, so much for having me. It's such a delight, and to get to be with both of you at the same time. What a treat.
I feel the same. I just want this time to continue.
I know. Yeah.
So thank you. Being in the presence of both of you is just lovely today.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Off we go. Back very soon for more beautiful work, beautiful life. Thanks, listeners, for being with us today. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.